This will be part 2 of the matrix of Satan. There will be 8 of these. It will be, if you're interested, it'll be boring. If it isn't, you'll get some information that you may not have. But I pray that it will be interesting, that it will be uplifting, and it will also give a few pointers. Now, last weekend, as you may have heard, there were over 100 people shot here in Chicago again. And you would think that things would get better, but things not. As the state teeters on the verge of bankruptcy, the rest of the country went ahead and celebrated the 4th of July last weekend. And they act as if all is well and things are swell, and they thank God for this country. I thank God for the safety of this country, because it didn't have to be that way, and we know that eventually it will not be that way. But the Bible has a little bit different view, and has had for quite some time, about how this world works. And most of us, even we in the churches, have ignored it. So let's get started with Matrix 2. Part 2, the corruption of leadership. Now, in the opening, going back to Hosea, the 13th chapter, Yahweh speaks of the people of Israel. But in his speaking, he's making a parallel statement to us. Because if you really look at it, both ancient Israel and, in all honesty, the United States and modern Israel are in meltdown. They don't see it that way, because a lot of it is self-inflicted by their denying their God and reveling in their sin. Let's go to Hosea, the 13th chapter, the 9th verse. In order to make this hold together and work, it has to be held together with in context scripture. Hosea, the 13th chapter, the 9th verse, where it says, "O Israel, you have destroyed yourself, but in me is your help. Where is your king now, that he may save you in all your cities? And your judges, of whom you said, 'Give me a king and give me rulers.' I gave you a king in my anger and took him away in my wrath." The iniquity of Ephraim is bound up. What that means is that his sins are held in abeyance, and you'll basically be punished for them all at the same time. Why? Because whoever Ephraim is never repented and had no intention to. It says again, the iniquity of Ephraim is bound up, his sin hidden. The pains of a woman in travail shall come to him. Anyone that's had babies, I haven't, but I've been there for it. Not the same thing, I'm sure, but you understand that it all comes at once, and it is rather painful until it's over. The pains of a woman in travail shall come to him. He is an unwise son, for he cannot stand still in the time of the breaking forth of sons. I will ransom them from the grave, from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, where are your plagues? O grave, where is your ruin? Repentance shall be hidden from my eyes. Though he is fruitful among his brothers, an east wind shall come. The wind of Yahweh will come up from the wilderness, and his spring shall be ashamed, and his fountain shall be dried up. He shall plunder the treasure of all desirable vessels. Now, as I said, this sermon series is designed to deal with ancient sources leading up to modern problems. I'm not going to deal with modern politics in its forms because we know what's going on there. And unfortunately, so many of us have taken sides within that. But this series, or at least this section of the series, deals with leadership in all of its forms and with the corruption of that leadership, where that corruption came from. To dwell on the modern effects of that leadership would take unnecessary time, as there has been little positive effect in mankind's leadership of man, going all the way back to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve chose to trust Satan rather than trust God. This revolt, though some may see it as small, was actually central to the problems we have even now. This first human-based shot fired by Satan was an attempt to take over rulership of not only the earth, but that was where he intended to start. But he knew if he could gain the earth, he would eventually rule over the universe. But he intended to start with the earth. The first man and woman trusted Satan over Elohim, and man has heeded that call of Satan ever since. We have followed Satan's ways ever since, and mankind has suffered in every way imaginable ever since. Ever since first heeding the call of this liar, this thief, and murderer. Oh, he doesn't present himself as a liar. He doesn't present himself as a thief. He doesn't present himself as a murderer. He comes smiling. He comes bearing what appear to be gifts, when in point of fact, what he offers you in most cases, if you would simply wait in obedience, it would come to you anyway. And you wouldn't have to get it through him. Therefore, you wouldn't feel the need to follow him into his little rabbit hole. Yet he has the ability, as I said, to present himself as a friend, as a confidant, and as one worthy of human trust. Yet never forget, Satan is only interested in one thing. One thing. He wants mankind out of the way. Oh, he will accept our worship in the meantime, but he wants us dead. Don't forget that. And this task is at the root of his every move in our regard. Anything, it may look friendly, it may look like something that's usable, it's something positive, something helpful, but understand, before it's all over, every tool he gives you will be as a knife stuck into your ribs. It's just the way it is. The Apostle Paul attempted to warn us in Colossians, the 2nd chapter, the 8th verse. Colossians, the 2nd chapter, the 8th verse, which says, "Beware lest anyone rob you through philosophy and vain deceit, according to the traditions of men, according to the elements of the world, and not according to Messiah." Satan's successful attempt to turn the first family against Elohim came in Genesis 3. Satan appealed to Eve's vanity and envy of the authority of Yahweh, convincing her that eating of the fruit from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil would set she and Adam as equals with the Godhead. They thought all of a sudden now we have equal knowledge we will gain equal power. We will be able to decide our fate. We will determine what we will do and what we will not do. And for this, both of them were evicted from the Garden of Eden. A flaming sword was set there to make sure that they didn't go back and get a chance to grab at the other tree that was there, the tree of life. Over time, you see, Yahweh chose a people, Israel, and set them apart. Allowed Egypt to enslave them, and Yahweh used his mighty power to set them free from Egypt. And they continually afterward rebelled against Elohim. Continually. Israel appeared to bow down and worship every pagan idol and anything that looked like a god that they encountered. They lusted after every form of human government that they encountered, good, bad, or indifferent. Anything was better than him telling us what to do. Never fully committing their loyalty to Elohim, even after all that he had done for them. But the pivotal moment in their and subsequently our history came when Israel rejected Yahweh's rule in the worst possible way. After he defeated the Philistines in their favor, for them. You'll find that in 1 Samuel, the 7th chapter. You can read that on your own. It's interesting. It shows you what ingratitude will do for you. The outcome of this decision is central to our theme today and can be found in 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter. And keep your finger there. We're going to go back and forth a little bit, but a lot of the time we spend here today will be spent here because this concept is central to the problems that we had then, and it is the center of our problems now, whether we recognize it or not. 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter, the first verse. And it happened when Samuel was old, he made his sons judges over Israel. And the name of his first son was Joel, and the name of his second, Abiah, judges in Beersheba. And his sons did not walk in his ways. See if any of this sounds familiar to you. And they turned aside after dishonest gain and took a bribe and perverted judgment. And all the elders of Israel gathered and came in to Samuel to Ramah. And they said to him, "Behold, you have become old, and your sons have not walked in your ways." Samuel, according to the record, was one of the best kings that Israel ever had. But as soon as he weakened a bit, you see what happened here. "Oh, behold, you have become old, and your sons have not walked in your ways." Now, wouldn't it make sense to just say, let's just get rid of the sons and bring in some people that will do the right thing and we can continue as we were? No. Once you stumble, someone wants to grab you, throw you to the ground, stomp on you, and take your spot. It's just the way we are. Verse 6. And the thing, wait, go back to 5. And they said to him, "Behold, you have become old, and your sons have not walked in your ways. Now appoint a king to us to judge us the way we want? No. Like the nations, like the Goyim, like the people." And the thing was evil in Samuel's eyes. And when they said, "Give us a king to judge us," and Samuel prayed to Yahweh, and Yahweh said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people, to all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from reigning over them. According to all the works that they have done, from that day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, when they forsook me and served other gods. So they are also doing to you. And now listen to their voice. Only protesting you shall protest to them, and shall declare to them the privilege of the king who shall reign over them. And Samuel spoke all Yahweh's words to the people who were asking a king from him. And he said, "This is the privilege of the king who shall reign over you. He shall take your sons and shall appoint them for himself among his chariots and among his horsemen, and they shall run before his chariots." In other words, any dart thrown at the chariots, guess who gets them first? You'll recognize that as you go on. Verse 12, "And he will appoint for himself heads of thousands and heads of fifties, and plow his plowing, and to reap his reaping, and heads of fifties to plow his plowing, and to reap his reaping, and to make weapons for war for him, and weapons for his charioteer," or for those of who rode in his chariots, or who were his warriors. "And he will take your daughters for perfumers and for cooks and for bakers, and he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards and the best, and give them to his servants. And he will tithe your seed and your vineyards, and will give them to his eunuchs and to his servants. And he will take your male slaves and your slave girls and the best of your young men and your donkeys, and will use them for his work. And he will tithe your flock, and you will be servants to him. You will cry out in that day because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. And Yahweh will not answer you in that day." And the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel and said, "No, but a king shall be over us. And we shall be, even we, like all the nations. And our king shall judge us, and shall go out before us and fight our battles." You already had a God that was winning your battles for you. What was the point? Verse 21, "And Samuel heard all the words of the people and spoke them in the ears of Yahweh. And Yahweh said to Samuel, listen to their voice, and you shall cause a king to reign over them." And if you read forward, you'll find out that that king was Saul. You won't have to say any more than that. You'll read it for yourself. You'll see what I'm talking about. That they realized right away, oops. But you can fall 5, 6 times. But most people, will they say, oops, I fell? You know what they do? Oh, I meant to do that. And keep going. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, "Go, each of you, go to his city. Every man go to his city." In other words, now that you have put this burden upon yourselves, go back and observe the problems that you have asked for firsthand. You will realize what you have brought upon yourselves. And because of their course of action, we see here the key to understanding everything that has gone on in any government run by man since the beginning of human existence. These verses are key to understanding the problems we have had in this country and will continue to have here and everywhere else on the earth until the return of Yeshua. But if we understand this concept, we will be more prudent in our conduct. We will have a greater understanding of our circumstances and a fuller understanding of our history. What did he say? Those who forget their history condemn themselves to repeat it. As I said, we'll have a greater understanding of our circumstances and a much fuller understanding of history, which should keep us more aware of the roots of certain problems as we watch the officials whom we trust force us again and again and again through their arrogance, through their ignorance, through their refusal to accept the existence, much less obedience to Elohim. We will be forced to repeat again and again and again Earth's tiresome, violent history over and over and over again until we finally learn and fall to our knees and pray to our Elohim to return and save us once and for all time from this evil. Title, once again, Matrix 2, The Corruption of Leadership. First of all leadership of this world is corrupt. Oh, I know what we think. I know what we heard during the campaigns. We've heard it in the campaign before that. We heard it in the campaign before that. We heard it in every little campaign here. We've had, what, the last three or four, about out of the last four governors, how many of them have either been thrown out or gone to jail or should have if they didn't? 3 out of the last 4, something like that. This is how it is. It's how it always has been. And until something drastic changes, how it will always be. Everything that we have done on this planet has been done against the plan of God. He has tried to silently mitigate our more dangerous mistakes behind the scenes by offering alternatives to Israel, hoping others would learn from them. But we and they have tossed aside the alternatives and gone deeper and deeper and deeper down Satan's little rabbit hole. I brought up 1 Samuel 8 as a guidepost because it perfectly outlines the path of the biggest mistake that man has made. Going out on his own and turning away from a God that had won for them every battle he fought for them, shown them in millions of little ways how to navigate this life safely, ending in eternal life in the kingdom of God. But we couldn't have that. Israel wouldn't have that. They decided to go out seeking to conduct their own affairs in their own way and turning away from the Almighty. Yahweh told Samuel to warn the Israelites of the consequences of the act of going it alone in a world made evil from the beginning by this arrogant refusal to hear the words of God. Initially, Yahweh gave man more than enough land to live a comfortable distance from each other, avoiding the problems and congestion brought on later by the evil city plans of Nimrod, who had everyone living in small quarters or walled cities. Oh, I'll protect you from the wild animals outside, but you've got to give me more power. This is where all of this city stuff came from. And the urban congestion that we now see in most cities anywhere in the world. You see the same things on the south side of Chicago that you see in India. And they've got more people, so you can imagine what it's like in India in certain parts. But you see, God gently warned man of too many people living in one place, living in one space, allowing the rich to buy the land and force many into small spaces for two reasons. Number one, to keep them all in one area. You can watch them and you can control what they do and what they have and how they live. And the other one, financial gain. Always, when you see something go wrong, follow the money, you'll find the problem. Isaiah, the 5th chapter, the 8th verse. Many people, I've never seen that before. I didn't know that he said anything about how we live. Isaiah, the 5th chapter, the 8th verse, where it says, woe to those touching house to house, bringing near field to field until the end of space. And you are made to dwell alone in the middle of the land. This is how it is now. Many own no land. In this country, you can buy a home, you can buy your house, but you will never be allowed to own the land the house sits on. And they will never tell you why. This limits your ability to live as you want because of the rules of the land. Many feel isolated and may not even know your neighbors from moving so much. You move into an area, you live there for years, and you never know who your neighbors are because they're constantly moving. Once it becomes too expensive, or it becomes too violent, or it becomes too crazy, they're moving. And new people come in, and I don't trust you, I don't trust you. Nobody knows anybody. Unless you're one of those rare people that maybe do own your home and have lived there long enough to come to the conclusion, as many do with intelligence, hey, listen, we're going to be here. Let's look out for each other. You have to do that. But if you don't do that, you'll find yourself all alone. Why? Because of the negative climate that you find yourself living in. Violence, drug use. Slowly, drug use is becoming, or have you noticed, more and more legal as time goes on. And some people love that. Oh, wow, I can do my thing now, and I won't have to worry about the police. No, you won't have to worry about your police. At that point, you have to worry about your body as it breaks down. But no, this is what we want. Or is it what someone else wants? Because if you're high, they control you, whether you realize it or not. The laws only allow you so much independence. Most cities don't allow you, if you notice, to raise livestock for food. And many cities don't allow much land for growing food, if they do you at all. So you are forced to buy food from grocers who sell genetically altered foods that are, while approved by the FDA and approved by the UN's World Health Organization, have been proven to be toxic. Any scientist will tell you that there is something wrong with genetically modified anything. I could get into the details of what is what, but there's so much more information out there. It takes longer to read it, but if I sit here and read all of that, and first of all, it's a snore, but it's real. Most things that are very important, when they bring it to you, it's a snore. But snore your way through it, and you'll learn something. Most, and check this out, if you go out and look it for yourself, Google it if you will. Most developed nations outside of the UN do not consider GMOs to be safe and have put significant restrictions, or some have outright banned them from their countries. Won't happen here. Too much money being made. Most of the world outside of the UN has banned GMO. That's including the countries who are considered to be so mean and evil to their people. Even North Korea bans GMO. Russia has banned GMO. But the US and Canadian governments have approved GMO. As a matter of fact, they've made it illegal to label the products as such. So you don't even know when you're eating GMO. Genetically modified foods. All of these approvals are based on studies by the same corporations that created them and profit from their sale. That's like saying, we'll let the foxes manage the hen house. That's like saying, we'll let the drug dealers decide which drugs are safe. Studies done by Monsanto, and for everybody else, everybody wants to blame everything on Monsanto, but we forget that there are 3 food companies producing GMO, not just one. Oh, but see, then they can later say, oh, it's all Monsanto. We'll sink Monsanto. That'll take care of the problem. Yeah, but what about ADM and Cargill? If anybody that is still watching your Sunday morning shows where they have politics, where they're telling you what's really going on, notice who the commercials are all advertised by. Archer, Daniels, Midland, or maybe you know them more by the letters. ADM. We feed the world. Garbage. And Cargill. Because of the tightening noose around us all, we find ourselves far less than free in a land that constantly brags of its freedom. The freedom of its people, which makes the prophecy of not buying and selling unless you take the mark of the beast a glaring reality that many deny. But I want you to note the prophecy of the end times on earth. Let's go to Revelation, the 13th chapter, the 16th verse. Everything is setting up. All the chess pieces are setting up for checkmate. And some of us don't even know how to play chess, so we don't even know what's going on. Revelation, the 13th chapter, the 16th verse, where it says, and the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves. Wow, first time in history, you've had everybody involved. But look at why. The small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free men and the slaves. Slaves? There aren't any slaves anymore, are they? Yeah. Dig deeper, you'll find them. It causes that they give to them all a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. Right hand meaning that it's going to control how you work, where you work, when you work. And on your forehead, which means that mind games will be in play. Verse 17, even that not any could buy or sell except the one having the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let the one having reason count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. And its number is 666, or 666. Many of these little, small encroachments on our freedom have been the norm for so long in this world that few of us remember a time when they were not in play, when they weren't the case. Especially in the cities and the surrounding suburbs, unfortunately, we're not so wise as the eternal. Many of us don't see these events as clearly as we should from our vantage, especially as believers. But don't feel bad about it. Neither did the elders of Israel when they went to Samuel demanding a king. We are now so used to taking orders from kings, from presidents, and other leaders and others making our laws that we simply obey. You'll even see caps now. Have you seen those, the kids walking around wondering where did they get that from? It just says right across the front, obey. Obey who? It just says obey. You see that a lot with the rappers. I think, I'll bust them out. Yeah, I think it was Jay-Z's company that produced those caps and a couple of others. And you see kids walking around with them, sagging pants, long shirt, but it says obey. That says something else to me, but that's just me. I'll leave it there. We're now, like I said, so used to taking orders from our leaders that we simply allow it. We allow it to happen, not fully understanding what's going on behind the scenes. Just like the elders didn't see what was coming in Israel, but being children of the Most High, he tried to warn them. Now, so that we see a little bit more clearly what's going on, let's go back through Yahweh's points of warning, point by point. This time, as we go through it, I want to point out a few things. Probably nothing you haven't seen, but maybe you didn't see it as important to your forward movement through God's way. 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter, the 10th verse. And Samuel spoke all Yahweh's words to the people who were asking for a king from him. And he said, "This is the privilege of the king who shall reign over you. He shall take your sons and shall appoint them for himself among his chariots and among his horsemen, and they shall run before his chariots." There are 196 recognized countries on this planet. Only 23 out of 196 do not have standing armies. All the others do. These armies were initially formed to offer protection from invasion by other nations, which also have standing armies designed initially to defend themselves against the other nations that had standing armies. You see the dog chasing his tail here? Now, had Israel continued to trust in Yahweh, this would probably not have been the case so early, this need for them to have an army. As surely no human army would be able to defeat the power of Almighty God. Yet, this is of old time. Few now believe in God in spirit and in truth. Oh, they talk about God, but we don't know who they're talking about. Sometimes they don't know who they're talking about, but others do. But we'll get to that later. But so many now have decided we must have bigger and better armies, more and more bombs, more and more guns, more and more. And what is the major, outside of defending your country, what do most armies do now? Invade other countries, take the goods back to the invading country, and make money. What is the biggest market right now in the world? The arms market. Guns, bombs, anything that kills, gases, all of this, all about money. Men and now women are forced into these armies when they reach legal age. Now, before 1974, the United States had a universal draft. All men had to serve once they turned 18 years old. Now, there's a bill floating around Congress that won't become an issue unless they draft again. But the bill says that now women also. Now women can kill for themselves. Shut up. But what I'm saying is that the women will now be drafted just as if there is a draft, women will be drafted as will be the men. If this bill passes. They're trying to keep people from knowing about it because what they're going to probably do is wait until midnight one night and slip it through when nobody sees it like they do everything else, like they did with the taxes back in 1906. But we won't go there. Just more of the problem of leadership. The current military, as I said, is all volunteers. Now note that whenever chariots are mentioned in the Bible, this is the equivalent of a modern tank back in those days. Chariots were the ancient armored vehicles of war. And now verse 12 will make more sense to you. He will appoint for himself heads of thousands and heads of 50s. Those are generals going into war. And to plow his plowing, and to reap his reaping, and to make weapons for wars for him, and weapons for his charioteers, or the men that go out and point and say, go die for them. These would be the modern support staff for the armed services. In modern days, they would be defense contractors for the armed services. And we've already seen how these men and women, at least the ones that come in the uniform, are barely paid enough to survive, and their families suffer as a result of their time in the Army in modern time. But ask about the ones from the private contractors. They can make enough money in one war to survive for the rest of their lives and live rather famously. It used to be Blackwater, I forget the name now, but these guys make a ton of money going in as what they call, private soldiers. The private soldiers make good money. The ones that come through the military make just enough to survive. So there is no fairness on any level in anything that is done here. Now, back in the Bible days, these positions were not volunteers. In the Eastern or Oriental civilizations, whatever job the king chose for you in war or in life, you were forced to do it or incur his wrath, which often meant prison or worse. You didn't choose your profession. The king chose it for you according to their need at that time. It kind of happens now, too, because if you notice that every once in a while you'll see the colleges come out and say, we need so many of this or so many of that, and you would make more money if you go to school for this or go for that. Same thing. We just don't see it that way because we think it's a good thing. And education in and of itself is a good thing. Directed education for a certain class of people. What happens when that particular discipline shuts down after you've put 4 years into it and have to pay off those loans? You see the problems here. It's got to be done differently. It's got to be done in a more professional way. But it never will happen because the center is a problem. The center from which all of these things flow out is a problem because it's not about whether you make it, it's whether they make it. But back in those days, you did not choose your profession. The king chose it for you according to the needs that they had at that time. Men were usually laborers or soldiers. Women had other jobs. Verse 13. And he will take your daughters for perfumers, those who make perfume, and for cooks, and for bakers. Perfume makers, cooks, bakers were some of the jobs of the time period. When you moved into the cities and had no land to farm, you had to take on a job in order to feed yourself. And as was mentioned earlier, your job was chosen by your king based on the needs of the village you lived in. Now, if you owned no land, or if the king hadn't taken it from you yet, or kings could take land from the commoners back then at their whim. It's a little bit harder now. I remember when I was, 7, 8 years old, and we were living in Euclid, and they wanted to build a school there, so they gave us a percentage of the amount of what our home was worth, and allowed us to go and buy another home somewhere else, when I would have thought that the right thing to do was just give them what the value of the house was. They don't do that. They just give you a percentage. You got to make the rest up yourself, even though they wanted the land for themselves. Laws have changed a little bit since then. They were in the 60s, but they can still do what they call eminent domain if they choose to. But the kings back then, they didn't have no rule. They could just say, hey, you, let's go. And that was the end of it. That's just how it has been. Kings could take land from commoners at their whim. In these modern days, we claim independence. And let's be real, if you can afford college or if you can afford trade school, you can choose your profession. This allows you a certain amount of independence regarding how you live, what you do. But if you don't have your own business or other legal means of income, and I put an emphasis on that legal because so many of us are out here under the, what do they call it now, the underground economy. You know the underground economy. Hey, got that stuff, want it? You know what I'm talking about. Don't sit there like, oh, what's he talking about? You know what I'm talking about. You've seen it. You've been walking down the street somewhere in some part of the city and somebody, hey, got that weed, got that stuff. Underground economy, they call it. As a matter of fact, show you how corrupt your tax system is. There's even a place on your tax form for underground, what they call off the books work. Think I'm kidding? Grab your tax forms on time. Take a look at it. They don't care how you do it. As long as they get their money, that's all that matters. But if you don't have your own business or some other legal means of income, you're beholden to an employer for your livelihood. It was customary at this time, however, in the East, for landowners who were the wealthier people of those times, that hasn't changed, to put people in a position where you would owe them and have to work off your debt. You used to hear people talk about that, how, all the slaves weren't always black. There were people that came over with the people that first came to the United States, and they came over as indentured servants. What is an indentured servant? An indentured servant says, if you pay my way over, I'll work for you for 6 months or however long to pay off my ticket to America. And then they get here, and all of a sudden, they find out that that person can't write. So they say, okay, that's 6 months, and they'll write down there an upside down 6, getting 3 more months for free. Even when slavery was released, how many of you are aware of the word Juneteenth? 1, 2, wow. This is interesting. Juneteenth was a day that was very important for slaves, because what happened when they released the slaves in 1865, they let it go in the newspapers, but unfortunately, most slaves could not read. So they got a whole year out of them by not telling them that they were free. However, in 1866, on June the 13th, they figured out a way to make sure that everybody got the memo. So, in a lot of places, as a matter of fact, I think it was last week, was it? that people were having Juneteenth parties? It was Juneteenth. You knew it was 13th, but you have to get that little Ebonic slant in there, Juneteenth, if you will. But this is not new stuff. Whenever you put someone over you in power and you have none, they're going to find a way to rip you off. Does it make them any worse than anybody else? No, but it just makes the climate pretty bad for everybody. Now, of course, if you got over there and decided that it was a ripoff, you decided that it was wrong or something happened, and hey, that was a 6 before. I can read. Now it's a 9. What happened? I'm going to sue you. All they would have to say, no, I would never do that. Oh, I would never do that. Next thing you know, you're in debtor's prison. Debtor's prison. If you refuse to work or decided to sue, you could be put into debtor's prison until you paid off your debt. And even in prison, you had to work in order to release you from your debt. So they had you any way they had you. This became a prevalent con of the landowners of this and to do this trick on local citizens. Get as much labor out of them as free as long as they could, as long as possible. Usually done with the assistance of the king. This practice was actually still around in the days of Yeshua. Let's go to Matthew, the 5th chapter, the 25th verse. Matthew, the 5th chapter, the 25th verse, where it says, agree with your adversary quickly while you are with him on the way. In other words, if you run into a problem, you do best to negotiate it before you get to court. You might get a better deal. Which you are with on the way. Lest perhaps the prosecutor deliver you to the judge, and the judge deliver you to the officer, and you be cast into prison. Most certainly I tell you, you shall by no means get out of there until you have paid the last penny. Now notice, he didn't say it was right, he didn't say it was wrong, because this wasn't his world. His world was going to be different. But in order for us to understand how bad we had it, he had to allow it to go as badly as it did. And for those who say that was hypocritical, no, he died for us. And that's why, to have that ability to come back in power and clean all that mess up upon his return. This practice did not stop then. This practice of corporations being in cahoots with the government to get free work continues to this day. And most of us, lock them up, lock them up. Gotta be tough on crime. Unless, of course, the guys that are doing it are in Brooks Brothers suits. We let them go. Many private prisons have sprung up over the last few years. CCA, GEO Group, others. But these private prisons have been hired by companies like Wrangler Jeans, IBM, HP, Art Glass, and others to produce their products and man their customer service desks. When the last time you called if you got to say a IBM or a, what they call it, Lenovo computer, and you have to call in to get it fixed? When you call into that help desk, you know where that help desk is? It's housed in Leavenworth Prison. Prisoners are paid minimal wages, or in some cases, the private prisons, nothing. The companies running the prisons are running them for profit. Thus, wages are far lower in these private prisons than they were when these jobs were offered in the public for competitive wages. The companies that build and run private prisons have a financial interest in the continued growth of mass incarceration. And most of them have contracts with the villages and cities that they reside in that we will continue to do this for you so long as you continue to keep the prison 90% full. Now, if everybody's not selling drugs, robbing people, raping, and murdering, with the crime statistic going down, how do you keep that at 90%? Now, these major players, as I've mentioned, CCA, GEO Group, and others, they invest heavily in lobbying for punitive criminal justice policies and make hefty contributions to political campaigns that will release, fuel, and increase reliance on these private prisons and to help them keep the prison filled. I want you to see if you notice this. Nearly anything to do with your car, if you park in the wrong place, you speed, forget to put on your seatbelt, most offenses now carry huge fines. Now, of course, if after so many fines you can't pay, what happens? Right back to the prison. Now, of these prisons, they're filling up because of the red light cameras that you see everywhere. It all links together when someone can pull it together for you to see it. The news isn't going to do that. We'll get to that in part 6. Why? You don't know anything. But you think you've read by reading the newspaper every day, watching the news every day, and I'm guaranteed you have of what I'm saying. You're like, what? It's real. It's real. Most auto offenses now carry huge fines, and if you can't pay the fine, off to prison you go. All of this while the regular companies are laying off workers by the droves, by the score. And as the economy teeters on the brink of collapse, most people don't know about that either, making it harder and harder still to live in these large cities. The crime rates multiply, and no one wants to say it's the economy, but, oh, there's jobs everywhere. Yeah, part-time, $7 an hour. And don't mention anybody says anything about, oh, wow, they should make the minimum wage 15. What? You criminal? They don't do anything. What's your time worth? What's your time worth? This isn't left, this isn't right, this is right down the middle, the truth. Truth doesn't swing to the left or swing to the right. It just tells the truth. And anybody will tell you, you will not survive long on $7.76 an hour. It just doesn't happen. But the crime rates multiply. The lack of opportunity is part of the problem. Crime rates multiply, murder rates are multiplying in the cities, and young and undereducated go straight to the underground economy, selling drugs, selling loose squares, whatever they can get. Loose cigarettes, you can sell them for so much a piece. Rather than you can't afford a pack of cigarettes, you find somebody that sells 1 or 2, and you'll be okay. It is what it is. Oh, I didn't know about that. There's a whole lot of going on out here we don't know about. Whole lot out here we don't know about. Or we know about it, but we think, oh, that's not going to affect us. as crime rates multiply, murder rates multiply, underage drug dealers are out there, and others are out there selling their bodies, pimping is back strong. For those who think that there is no more slavery, that's all whoredom is. It's just a form of slavery. And we won't even get into what goes on overseas where they got children and then have our rich potentates who can fly off to Indonesia where it's legal to have sex with 4- and 5-year-olds who are in slavery camps. Oh, we didn't know about that either. Oh, well, you do now. Something else to pray about. Something else to understand about when you see kids on the street for too long. You see all these kids disappearing. Wow, and you never hear about them again. That's because a lot of them are off these offshore places, enslaved and selling, not their own, they don't want to do it, but they were kidnapped and dragged off to sell their bodies to our corporate heads who have these fetishes, they call them. It's sick. Oh, wow, he's preaching about that? Yes, somebody needs to. I haven't heard it anywhere else. Not often. Walter V to some of those folks, but nobody else. It's crazy, and it's getting worse. It's worse and worse and worse. And all of this is underreported in terms of where it is. Oh, they'll talk about Chicago, but they don't tell you about what's going on in the suburbs where crystal meth is now king. Heroin is trying to nudge it out of the way. And usage and prostitution are going up, even in the suburbs. Because they have to resort to crime to support these drug habits, because if you're on drugs, you might be able to hold down a job, but not for long. All of this is increasing the finances of these private prisons. And the public prisons aren't doing too bad either. But you see, this is not helped by the increasing taxes by governments who raise taxes on the middle class and remove the load from the corporations. I live in a town where how they get you in, you don't have to pay taxes for 2 or 3 years. If the corporations don't pay taxes, who does? Hello. Oh, I wonder why they don't have a so-and-so here. Because they wanted too much of a break. That's why the certain stores aren't in your neighborhood, because they wanted to pay nothing. Now, if everybody pays nothing and you've only got so many people, look around the neighborhood and see how many homes are for sale, how many people are moving out because the taxes are too high already. And these guys did just what? Raise them again? To balance the budget? Balancing the budget on your back again? This is reality. This book is reality. What they're telling you is fluff. It's lies. This is the truth. And this was what, 2,000 years ago? And it's more updated than your newspaper? I would say maybe we should read this book more. Now, if you find yourself unable to pay your taxes in this situation, you may find that what happens to you is exactly what Yahweh told the Israelites would happen with their new king. Let's go to 1 Samuel, the 10th chapter, go to the 14th verse. 1 Samuel, the 10th chapter, the 14th verse, where it says, "And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, the best, and give them to his servants." That would be, in modern parlance, they're wealthy lobbyists and the corporate heads and the companies that own them. "And he will tithe or tax your seeds and your vineyards, and will give them to his eunuchs and to his servants. It didn't say it would give them to the people that owed the money. It said it give it to the people that pay him to do this dirt. These days, we call that something else that they say doesn't exist: corporate welfare. Now, of course, no politician will ever tell you what this is, but it does exist. It's not like Santa Claus. It does exist. Now, you want to get the good information on what's going on with corporates? They won't tell you publicly, but how many of you have heard of the Cato Institute? The Cato Institute. One. That's good. The Cato Institute defines corporate welfare this way: special government subsidies or benefits that are targeted to specific industries or businesses. Corporate welfare can take the form of direct government grants, direct government loans that never have to be paid back, insurance or subsidies provided to business, trade barriers designed to protect U.S. firms, in particular industries, from foreign competition. In other words, they pay you to make the money and then raise the taxes on everybody else and drop them on you, so your goods get out there and everyone else has to pay taxes, so they decide, well, we'll sell them somewhere else. And you'll never make as much money in Guyana as you will in the United States. They give loans, insurance, subsidies, they provide all these to business, and they set up trade barriers designed to protect U.S. firms, in particular industries, from paying taxes. So they give them a loophole in the tax code carved out solely for the benefit of that particular company or industry. Notice how the only company that you'll ever know of that can raise and lower their prices day to day, oil companies. Notice how your gas prices go up on the weekends, and during the middle of the week it goes down a few cents, and that. Nobody else can do that. Jewel can't do that with their food. Oh, he's telling everything. You got to get rid of him. It is what it is. I won't get into all of that boring stuff like ethanol subsidies, offshore tax credits, foreign tax credits, or how oil companies are allowed to raise or lower their prices at will, while others can only do it with the agreement of Congress. It is what it is. But all of this is going to change as there are further and further fluctuations and instability in the economy. But all of these political machinations cost we taxpayers. Yet the corporations and the paid-off politicians profit from these same problems at our expense. Similar evils were going on in Samuel's day, verse 16. And he will take your male slaves and your slave girls and the best of your young men and your donkeys, and will use them for his own work. Oh, wow, you can always go to the Peace Corps. Verse 17, he will tithe or tax your flock, and you will be servants to him. Now, with all of the fireworks and partying last weekend, I think we labor under the illusion that we are truly free. We get all caught up in the mask that is over us, and we forget that most of us have jobs that barely allow us time off from work or enough pay to cover all our expenses. Many have to fight every week to get this Sabbath off. It's a freedom born in hypocrisy. Because of the caliber of leaders that have risen up among us, the document is solid. Anyone who's ever read the Constitution, the document is solid. And if we went by it, as so many claim, oh, I'm a constitutionalist, I believe in the Constitution, then why aren't we following it? You know why? Because the caliber of leaders that have risen up among us care nothing about it. They only want money. And they don't want yours because they know they've already got yours. They want it from the folks that have lots of it. So they pay them off to basically anything that's in the Constitution that they don't like, erase it or just ignore it. What are they going to do, sue you? They don't have any money because lawyers cost money. So it's not going to happen. We tend to forget the condition that this country was born in. Hypocrisy reigned. Men wrote in boldness, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Yet, to a man, every one of those founding fathers, all of them, or well, a few of them anyway, claiming Christianity, but they owned slaves. Yet, if they were believers and they were reading this book, why did they own slaves? Notice what the Bible says about God's people owning other believers as slaves. Leviticus, the 26th chapter, the 13th verse. Leviticus, the 26th chapter, the 13th verse, where it says, "I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who has brought you out from the land of the Egyptians, from being their slaves. And I will break the bars of your yoke and cause you to stand erect." In other words, to stand straight. Exodus, the 21st chapter, the 16th verse. Exodus, the 21st chapter, 16th verse. "And he that steals a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, he shall surely be made rich." Oh, I'm sorry. Let's try that again. "And if he steals a man and sells him, or he is found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death." Most of your banks, Bank of America, Chase, maybe JP Morgan Chase, it has been found from an interesting little study that I think it was Dorothy Tillman's daughter did, where they went back and checked their finances going all the way back and found out that most of them started their funding lines up by selling off their slaves. Deuteronomy, the 24th chapter, the 7th verse. Fascinating. I love numbers. 24/7. Evil. 24/7. Deuteronomy 24/7. "If a man is found stealing a person of his brothers, the sons of Israel, and make a slave of him or sells him, then that thief shall die, and you shall put evil away from among you." Anyone recognized as a believer in God should have never been made a slave. Yet, it was widespread in this country. In the Declaration of Independence, they wrote of the British inciting unrest among the Indians and the savages against them. This mindset has prevailed onto this day and has impeded progress in this country at every turn. The additional idea that only the wealthy and well-educated should lead has been a hindrance. And then it was decided that only those who were educated in certain schools and in certain professions could lead. In other words, most of your big-time leaders are from Ivy League schools. Now, I didn't have time to get into where the Ivy League schools got started. I'll just say it for yourselves. Just look at, for those people who think it's great to be a rogue, Freudian slip. Rhodes Scholar. I said, what did I say, rogue? Look at it for yourself. You'll see that that was a Freudian slip, but it was hardly a slip. Thus, lawyers and the wealthy suddenly became as kings in modern society, and now they've added on entertainers to go along with that. And they have behaved exactly as did the kings of old, because human nature has not changed. These men and women don't have a true faith in the eternal. They put on and posture, and it is now popular to talk of God, small g. But is it truly Elohim that they speak of? As they invade other countries, kill by the thousands daily, and dare anyone to speak against them, or they be called not patriotic. Is it the eternal that they speak of, as the poor are trampled underfoot and no one helps them? Most make the poor out as criminals and thieves themselves, and it's the eternal that they speak of when they speak of these laws that they're passed that allow corporations to deny you the ability to pray on the Sabbath or worship on the Sabbath. Surely we are near the end times. Yet, are we praying? Many don't want to speak of such things from the pulpit, but what does the Bible tell us to do? In Ephesians, the 5th chapter, the 11th verse. What does it tell us to do? Take no part in the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather hide them so no one knows. Don't say a word. Tell them everything is, oh no, that's not what it says. Let's do that again and get it right. Take no part in the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. For it is disgraceful even to mention the things that are done by them in secret. However, since we have not been alert and have embraced many of these political policies and practices because we have amassed a little wealth ourselves or hope to do so, what will happen when we're on the short end of these policies and these little cycles of corrupt leadership finally come full circle? In other words, the world is round. That's what it means when it says something comes full circle. You throw something out there and you stand there thinking that you got away with something, and all of a sudden, maybe 365 days later, it comes back to bite you. Well, so, as I said, what happens when the policies and this cycle of corrupt leadership finally comes full circle? What'll happen when we cry out to the Father and Yahweh? Let's go back to 1 Samuel, the 10th chapter, the 18th verse. And you will cry out in that day because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, and Yahweh will not answer you in that day. However, since we have not been alert and have embraced many of these things, it is what it is. It will happen. But the eternal will not answer you in that day. And why? Because Elohim wants you to see in all of its evil rapaciousness what mankind is capable of when left totally to his own devices. But now this, and any of this that we've heard of, or any of this that we know of, hopefully in hearing it, we'll keep our communication lines open and keep a communication line open with Elohim. Praying, not for evil upon these people. Evil has a tendency to, like I said, once you throw it out there, it might take a while to get around and get back to you, but it will get back to you. So we pray for the safety of our brothers. We pray for the love of each other. Because some don't love each other. Don't think we all the believers. No. This is the most separated hour of the week. Sad as that is. We should all be following this. But we get sidetracked by politics, we get sidetracked by money, we get sidetracked by so many different things, and we forget all about it. But check this out. We who have kept our communications open with Elohim will still be heard. Psalms, the 34th chapter, the 6th verse. Psalms, the 34th chapter, the 6th verse, where we've heard this before, but now it'll become more real to us as we head into these days. This poor man cried, and Yahweh heard and saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of Yahweh encamps round about those who fear him and delivers them. Taste and see that Yahweh is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in him. Oh, fear Yahweh, his holy ones. For there is nothing lacking to those who fear him. You may not have everything that you want, but you will, if you check it out, find that you have everything that you need through Yeshua, if you remain in contact with him. And this will be necessary because we're reaching a point where nothing will be the same anymore. You can sense it. You can feel it. People seem to be losing their minds. Anything that they can imagine, or whomever that they see that they want to do, anything they want to do, any evil deed that comes into their mind, they just do it. The murders you see now are insane. No one looks up to leadership anymore because the leaders are just as corrupt as everyone else. And don't be so foolish as to think that just started since last November. No. Didn't. I'm not going to go through all of them because I'd be up here for the next 3 hours. We're running out of time now. But it is what it is. No one looks to leadership anymore because, as I said, the leaders are just as corrupt as everyone else, if not more so. Isaiah, the 5th chapter, 20th verse. He always speaks out against it. Isaiah, the 5th chapter, the 20th verse, where it says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, those who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those wise in their own eyes and bright in their own sight. Woe to those mighty to drink wine and brave men to mix strong drink, who justify the wicked for a bribe and take away the righteousness of the righteousness from him." But in dealing with this weak leadership, we're left down here and have to fend for ourselves until the trial is over. So the question is asked, what makes a good leader? What is the greatest quality for a leader? The best example I can think of is the one we worship. Matthew, the 20th chapter, the 25th verse. The best example I see is the one we worship. And if we see it clearly, let's understand it. Matthew, the 20th chapter, the 25th verse, where it says, "Yet Yeshua called them and said, you know that the rulers of the nations exercise dominion over them, and they who are great exercise authority over them. However, it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to be great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be chief among you, let him be your servant." You even hear the politicians, "Oh, I'm just your servant." Then why do you have 5 bodyguards around you, a bulletproof car, and a better insurance policy than the one you keep throwing at us? 28. "Even as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for the rich." Oh no. Let's get that right. "Even as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. And as they departed from Jericho, a great crowd followed him." The only leader we should be seeking right now is our returning Messiah. For it is obvious that we will not find sufficient leadership qualities in these human beings. Because why? Because they're just human beings. I liked that one, Eddie. I just had to give credit where it was. The first time I heard somebody say that, I think it was Eddie Van Halen, of all people. He said, "What did you expect from them?" They're human beings. So that's what they are. They're humans being. There is a reason why humans don't qualify. You see, in this world, arrogance seems to be the first qualification that people look for in their leaders, rather than humility or meekness. I never look for it in world leaders because it's not there. Each president or prime minister seems more interested in their legacy than how their people are treated in peaceful existence. Yet the people are so into their conservative or progressive political mindsets that their minds can't seem to filter out that which is anti-God from either side, from that which is for God from either side. And the leaders from both sides have continually carried forth policies that surely brought vexation to the spirit of Elohim. Yet, they both know that it will all be corrected in their time. Policies from both sides have proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that man will never govern all people fairly. The poor are abused, the minorities are marginalized. But the programs that are set up allegedly to try to help the poor or the minorities are used by the progressives to line their pockets, while nothing changes positively as a result of the programs they put in place, except for maybe the people that put the programs in place make a little bit more money. It's a study in biblical ignorance to follow either political side in any country, as all of these governments are Satan's governments. The world is completely under Satan's sway right now, and all of it is designed according to his dictates. In John 12:31, Yeshua refers to Satan as the prince or god of this world, and he indicates that he at this point had qualified to replace him in that role. John, the 12th chapter, let's go back to the 27th verse. John, the 12th chapter, the 27th verse, where it says, "And my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. For this cause I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then there came a voice from heaven saying, "I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." Speaking of the end times. Then the crowd who stood by and heard said that it thundered. Others said an angel spoke to him. Yeshua answered and said this voice did not come because of me, but for your sakes. Now is the judgment of the world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. And if I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. And when Yeshua returns, Satan will be bound and chained and held over for trial until his release at the end of the 1,000-year millennium. Then he will rebel again and turn the people of earth against Elohim once again, proving for all time that his evil is an unrepentant evil. Revelation, the 20th chapter, the first verse. Almost done. Revelation, the 20th chapter, the first verse, where it says, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the abyss and a chain, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hands on the dragon, the old serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. And he cast him into the abyss and shut him up and set a seal on him that he should not deceive the nations anymore until the 1,000 years be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little time. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the witness of Yeshua and for the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast, nor his name, or his image, or the number of his name, nor had received his mark on their foreheads, nor in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Messiah 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. You see, Satan's rebellion against Elohim was unnecessary. All he had to do was sit back and obey, and he would have had all this. But he wanted it all. He says, it's not enough to live in paradise, I got to run it too. All he had to do was obey. But he chose to rebel, chose to try to rule the world his way. And God is letting it happen. Letting it happen so that not only we see that it was wrong and that it was errant, that it was evil, and that it didn't make any sense. In his last breath, Satan will see it too. He may not admit it, but he will see it. He will see it. So Yeshua earned the right to take it back from him. But the current world's governments and religions are under his Luciferian system of fortresses and mysticism. We know who handles fortresses and mysticism: Islam and Catholicism. All of this is at the root of our government and is at the root of all other governments. No government on this planet is fair to their people. None. All are under the rule of Satan's secret societies, which openly worship him at the upper levels, above 33. But at Yeshua's return, all will be turned back over to the rightful leader, who will judge with fairness and rule with honor. And he will finally get a chance, we will finally get a chance to see what this world is like under a kingdom ruled in fairness and equity. I did not say equality, I said equity. There is a difference. You You see, those of the first resurrection are rewarded first because they went through it just as Christ did. And they will be given their positions of authority for all eternity. Revelation, the 20th chapter, let's go to the 7th verse. Revelation, the 20th chapter, the 7th verse. And when 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be loosed out of his prison, and he will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle. The number of them is as the sand of the sea. That's amazing to me. After seeing the last 1,000 years of absolute peace, he comes along with a lie. And as many people as are in the sand of the sea, from these people who have lived under God's sovereign and peaceful and positive rule, suddenly decide, we can run this. Verse 9. And they went up over the breadth of the earth and circled around the camp of the saints in the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet were. They are already gone. And he will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And I saw a great white throne, and him sitting on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and a place was not found for them. And I saw the dead, the small and the great, stand before Almighty God, and books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. The books were this book. The other book is the book of life, with the names of those who will make it in, even at this juncture. And the dead were judged out of these things, which were written in the books, or in here. Oh, wow, you don't have to do that anymore. Then why are you being judged by it? And the dead were judged out of these things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead in them. And each one of them was judged according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. That is so, I can't tell you how many funerals we've done here, how many memorial services, and you say second death, and people go, huh? No matter how many years they'd been in the church, they'd never heard this. Verse 15. And if anyone was not found having been written in the book of life, he was cast into the lake of fire. May we all live lives that will be found worthy to have our names written in the Lamb's book of life, making it into that first resurrection. But in order to do that, we have to live this way now. We have to do it in the midst of Satan's diversions. And I think anyone will agree that if you can make it through these diversions, you've more than made a place for yourself. I'm not going to say earn it. No one has earned it. But this is what you have to do to make it, which will be tough. But we can do it. We can do it if we do it in complete obedience to the word of Elohim. We have to take these lessons of humility and show Messiah the depths of our love of his way and our obedience to his way of life. Because if we can't do that, we're never going to make it into the kingdom of God. Next week, we'll go to part 3, which is one that has been very interesting for me, even in studying it again. The matrix of religion. God bless you all.